mode.
Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the webinar for this month. Let me get this set up for us before we get started. Welcome to the Accessing the Georgia Milestones. This is the middle school session. I am Sawanda Coffee. I am the math mentor here at West Georgia RESA. And what we are pretty much doing with the webinars is just providing an additional resource for you to use to reference back to as you prepare your students for the upcoming Georgia Milestones this spring. The format of the webinars are pretty much the same. I have chosen a resource, an assessment item from that resource. I will provide you with the standard that is addressed in the assessment item. I also provide the lesson essential question or an example of a lesson essential question designed for that assessment item. I also, take you through some of the standards for mathematical practices that are encouraged for teachers to use as they continue to give instruction and they are steadily preparing your students for the upcoming assessment. Of course, there are norms for this webinar. You will be muted during the presentation, and the reason why that is to just decrease the amount of noise in our background settings so that we do not have that extra feedback. Also, you may type in questions during the presentation. If I'm not able to actually answer your questions during the presentation, then what I normally do is I'll compile the questions and provide answers back, and I'll provide those answers back to everyone via email. And that's just due to the webinars only being about 30 minutes. Also, at the end of each of the presentations, there will be a link to the recording uploaded to the West Georgia RESA site. I provided that web link for you, but the instructions of how to get there is visit the West Georgia RESA site home web page, and then there will be a tab at the top left that says services, and you would just go down to where it says recorded webinars. Now we have those available for math as well as ELA. So if you are in a building and you have other coworkers that maybe teach those content areas, or if you teach both of those, then just visit that website for additional resources. Let's just talk about some quick overview of the Georgia Milestones. I know you've probably been hearing a lot about those. Of course, this year, definitely the second semester as we, push forward for that time in the next couple of months. So let's first talk about the item types. You have a selected response, which we know very well as our multiple choice. That is, of course, for all of our content areas. We have those evidence-based selected response, which is just for our ELA population. We have constructed response item types, and that is for your ELA and mathematics, and extended response, which is for ELA and mathematics. Now, in the future, of course, we will have those technology enhanced items, and that will begin in our 2016-17 school year. A quick look over the definition when we talk about constructed response and extended response. But constructed response is just basically an assessment item that probably just requires, a short answer from the student instead of just that traditional multiple choice. With extended response, those items require more elaborate answers and explanations. And a good example, of course, when it comes to math, it just may be a detailed explanation of the steps that the students were able to take, or they'll give a justification of their reasoning behind why they answered and how they answered a particular question. They do allow for multiple answers, as I just stated, or varying methods of arriving at the correct answer. So keep that in mind when we're preparing our students for that, the difference between the constructed response and the extended response. Also, let's talk about just the general test parameters for mathematics. Of course, you will have those criterion reference items, and the students will have a total of 53 of those items, and the point value is about 58. And how you break that down is 50 selected response. We just talked about the definition of that, and also have those point values. Two constructed response. Remember, those are more of a short answer as opposed to just choosing a multiple choice answer. And then they have one constructed response, but this is more of the extended response. The point value is higher, so this would be more of an extended response. The norm reference, and though a total of 20 of those, 10 of which contribute to the criterion reference score above. So you'll have 10 that are norm reference. That is where the students will pretty much be based off of um, a national platform, if you would use that term. And then the criterion reference would be those standards that are related to either what they have currently seeing, or they've previously saw in the previous grade. Embedded field test item, of course, they have about 10 of those. Okay, let's go ahead and get started, of course, with the assessment item for today. It is coming from an 8th grade. And normally how I work the webinars, I normally feature an assessment item from the 6th, the 7th, and 8th grade. But today is just going to be from the 8th grade curriculum. So that standard for today is EE4, and it says perform operations with numbers expressed in scientific notation, including problems where both decimal and scientific notation are used. Use scientific notation and choose units of appropriate size for measurements of very large or very small quantities. Interpret scientific notation that has been generated by technology. So we have some key words that if we're teaching this in the 8th grade curriculum, that we definitely want to hone in on those verbs and making sure that, our students are able to do the verbs as well as the information that comes behind those verbs. So keep that in mind when you're providing instruction on this standard or just any of your standards. The lesson essential question for this is, how do you perform operations with numbers expressed in scientific notation? And I spoke about the standards for mathematical practice earlier, and I want to just highlight some of those standards of the 8 standards that particularly address the assessment item that we're going to be reviewing. Standard 1 is always a must. Make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Standard 5, use appropriate tools strategically. And these are going to be some of the things that we will want to actually encourage our students to be able to demonstrate why they are answering this type of assessment item. And standard 6, attend to precision. I always emphasize in these webinars that standard 1 and standard 6 are, once again, a must. These should be demonstrated in every single lesson that we present to our students. We want to ensure that the students are also demonstrating the student behaviors that are related to these standards for mathematical practice. There is a document that is out there on the internet that is called the SMP's Look Fors. I would definitely advise you to go and seek that document and to look at what the teacher behaviors are as well as the student behaviors for these standards for mathematical practice. They are directly aligned to the TAP standards for the TEKS evaluation system. So just take time out to actually go and review that and start using those strategies in your classroom if you have not. Okay, let's look at this extended response assessment item, and remember the difference between constructed response, as we talked about earlier, and the extended response. So this would be an example of one of the questions that they will have on their milestones or the prototype. So it says the 2012 London Olympics opening ceremonies were watched by 4.07 times 10 to the 7th people in the United States. The 2008 Beijing Olympics opening ceremonies were watched by 3.98 times 10 to the 7 people in the United States. So part A of this is how many more people in the United States watched the 2012 London opening ceremonies than watched the 2008 Beijing opening ceremonies? Write your answer in scientific notation. The assessment item resource for this month is from Louisiana. They have some very, very good assessment items in a guidebook that they've published. So go and Google and search for that. I will also provide the link at the end of the webinar for this resource. Part B for this assessment items is the population of the United States is approximately 3.1 times 10 to the 8th people. What percentage of people in the United States watched the 2012 London opening ceremonies? Round your answer to the nearest whole percent. We want to definitely, when we provide these types of questions in our classrooms, we definitely want the students to understand all parts of the question. So we have to, kind of train them and, give them those multiple opportunities to be able to answer these types of questions. So they have to be presented before they actually see it on the test. Part C is if everyone who watched the 2012 London opening ceremonies in the United States spent $15 each on advertised products, how much would they spend altogether? Write your answer in scientific notation, show your work, or explain your reasoning. Now, I've seen some students lose points on just the last sentence is show your work and explain your reasoning. So one thing that I ask when you are part of the webinar is just to think about the standards for mathematical practice, think about the behaviors as a teacher, and then once again, what behaviors should students be using or demonstrating for them or to help them answer these types of questions. No, the strategies to address the problem. Now, this is a new strategy that I have come across. We have a specialist in our office, Ms. Bennett, that is going around and she is, providing professional learning to our different school districts. And you may have seen her in your building, but she's used this ACE for math kind of approach. And I'm going to highlight in this month. So let's look at it and see how it works in the midst of our assessment item for today. A is the already know. So what we would have a student to do is, highlight those key terms, identify what they already know about the problem. And then C is for compute your work, show your work, label, draw a model. It's always good to have the students to write down everything that they know, try to work out everything on on whatever paper that they have, draw pictures to help them to gain a better understanding of what the question is asking. And then E, of course, is explain in writing how you got your answer. And as we noted before, in the different parts of this assessment item, the requirement is for the student to actually explain their thought process and explain how they came up with their answer. So either step-by-step explanations or details, or just being able to explain mathematical terminology used, how and why you use those steps or that process to answer. Also, with the webinars, I try to provide an example of different scoring for students. The highest score on this particular rubric with the Louisiana resource is a 4, then a 3, a 2, a 1, and then they may also have a 0. So I wanted to provide you with that example of what some students answer and the point value that they receive along with an explanation. So once again, with part A, the student had to find out how many more people in the United States watched the 2012 London opening ceremonies than watched the 2008 Beijing opening ceremonies, and write your answer in scientific notation. So you'll see what the students came up with was 9 times 10 to the 5th more people watched the 2012 London opening ceremonies. And you can see pretty much what the student did is, translated the scientific notation into just numerical value and then did the subtraction and then transferred it back into scientific notation. With part B, this is a score of 4, which is the highest, and that is the population for the United States is approximately 3.1 times 10 to the 8th, and it talked about what the percentage of people in the United States watched the 2012. So we see that the work of the student and the answer was 13% of the United States, and we can see what they um, actually came up with. And the response for the evaluator that graded this is for part B, the student provides the correct answer, 13%, and they earn that 1 point. And then when you have part C, and that question asked again, if everyone who watched the 2012 London opening ceremonies in the United States spent $15 each on advertised products, how much would they spend in all? And then write your answer in scientific notation. So they came up with the answer of 6.105 times 10 to the 8th is how much they spent all together. So once again, as we're going through these, just think about the standards for mathematical practice, and we're going to be seeing students that did not score a perfect score on this. So we need to think about, as teachers, what feedback would we provide to these students to help them to actually be able to score a 4 if they had to do it all over again. This is for a student that scored a 3. Let's look at their part A as well. Once again, there's how many more people watched in 2012 than in 2008. And so this student earned all of the points that they needed by coming up with the answer of 9.0 times 10 to the 5th. So they earned all the points they needed for part A. And let's look at part B for this student. Same thing. They came up with the 13% as the previous student that scored the total number of point value, which is just 1. Then let's look at part C for this second student. When you had to come up with the total amount, they each spent $15. Then we want to, look at what the student started as far as their work. And let's look at what they did as far as their math computation, because that may be sometimes just a minor additional subtraction or multiplication point or issue that they came across, and that may have caused their point value not to be the total amount for that question. And what we see from here is the student did provides an incorrect amount because he used the total population given in part B instead of only the number of people who watched. So although the student uses the incorrect population figure to calculate the answer, he does demonstrate the correct procedure needed to answer the question. So once again, we just see that instead of earning 2 points, the student did receive 1 point out of 2 points, because the process was right. It's just the incorrect numbers were used. And so, of course, we always want to indicate to students that, this will happen. So they have to be careful of just those small details when they're working out those problems. This is the third student who scored a 2. And remember, the total possible points were 4. And let's look at what their answer for part A was when they had to find how many more people watched in 2012 than 2008. And the response from the evaluator is the student provides the correct amount in standard notation, but fails to put the final answer in scientific notation, receiving 0 points, because it distinctly says write your answer in scientific notation. So this would be a time as a teacher to provide feedback and to, ensure that our students are reading the entire question and understanding each part that they are responsible for providing back. The part B for this student, with the population and trying to find the percentage, where this student came up with 7%. And from the previous scoring of the other students, we know that that is not the correct answer. And the student just pretty much took the 407 and divided it into where the expanded number for 3.1 times 10 to the eighth, I'm sorry, and came out with the 7%, which of course that's incorrect. And then their part C, the student came up with 6.105 times 10 to the eighth, and we see how they came up to that, which we see that that is the correct answer in scientific notation. So the student was able to earn the full 2 points for this part. The next student scored 1 point. So of course, let's see with part A with the how many more students from 2012 watched in 2008. We see that the student was able to come up with the computation and also to come up with the correct answer of 9.0 times 10 to the 8th. And they earned the total amount of 1 point for this part A. With part B, the student came up with 72%. And we see that there was some type of error in the student's calculation, but there wasn't everything here wasn't provided to really give a deep explanation of what the student's process was. So as a classroom teacher, and if we provided this in our class, then we would want them to actually, maybe give us an explanation of how they came up with the 72%. So of course, this was an incorrect answer. So the student did not earn the total amount of points. So they did not earn any of the points. And next with the part C for this student, once again, we look at what the student was doing as far as they started off with a good process, but they ended up having the incorrect answer in the end, which was 24.42 times 10 to the fifth, which is an incorrect answer for if each person spent $15 and how much would they have spent together. And of course, we have this student who did not earn any points out of 4. And when we look at these types of answers, then this is a clear indication that the student, is still having some difficulty in certain areas. They are not understanding maybe what the question was asking, so therefore they were not able to even start on the right path to giving a correct answer. Same thing when you look at part B, but this is just a great opportunity, as a teacher to provide some very good feedback, some steps, some processes that the student needs to take in order to, actually work on mastering this standard. Because this student came up with 97% of the population. And then lastly, this looks like the student came up with $6,105 as a total amount for 15 people, with all the number of people that how much they spent together. So of course, just an opportunity, like I said, to be able to provide feedback. And that of course brings us to this moment of the webinar. I love to instruct teachers and talk about the feedback that we should be providing to our students. It must be written or verbal feedback, and I think it must be given quite frequently. It may not be weekly, but I say quite frequently. So just think about, setting up a plan to actually sit down with your students individually to conference with them about how do they move on to mastering the standard. If you have students that have mastered this standard, then okay, we'll provide them feedback as well on their next step to the next standard, how, what they should be working on next. The feedback must be provided, to tell the student exactly the next steps. I just said that in mastering the standard. And also use the language of the standards when providing feedback. We have to reference our standards in a way that the student understand what we are wanting them to do in the end. So make sure you're constantly using the language of the standards. The rubric with the scoring observations. Once again, this is from the a Louisiana assessment guidebook. So go back and research it, and it provides this information to you. And it just gives you a breakdown of the scoring and some explanations. So these are some things that, as a teacher, you could be looking for when you actually sit down and grade the assessment item. And it tells you the explanation. Same thing here with part C. And it also kind of breaks down with as far as score and observations, but that can be something you can develop later. But it just kind of gives you a guide on what the students in Louisiana who was actually given this assessment item performed. We are at the end of the webinar. I thank you again for joining me. And the resource for the month is from Louisiana. It's called Louisiana Believes. I provided the link for you here. And I've also provided the link to access the previous webinars that we have located once again through our homepage on West Georgia RESA. It's the services tab, and then go down to the recorded webinar. If you have any questions,